I didn't realize how fast your name can disappear at work until I watched mine get erased in real time. It was a Monday morning, not even dramatic. Just that dull, gray kind of corporate Monday where people pretend they're awake and the coffee tastes like burnt paper. At 9:12 a.m., my calendar pinged with a meeting I didn't recognize. Project ownership alignment required. No agenda, no notes. Just a Zoom link and 5 executives I never met with, unless something was already on fire. I stared at it for a second like it had to be a mistake, because I wasn't some junior analyst being shuffled around. I was the one who built our internal automation stack, the workflows that kept client deliveries from collapsing when sales overpromised and ops panicked. It was unglamorous work, but it was the kind that made the company look competent. And I'd been doing it quietly for 3 years. I joined the call. Cameras were on. Everyone looked too composed, like they'd already had this conversation without me. My director, Greg, smiled the way people smile when they're about to do something ugly but want to look civilized doing it. "All right," he said, hands folded. "This is straightforward. We're consolidating ownership across key initiatives to reduce dependency risk." Dependency risk. That phrase is like a knife with a velvet handle. Sounds responsible. Means we don't want you to have leverage. He shared his screen. A slide deck popped up, our company template, the one with the glossy branding and the fake sincere stock photos. And there it was. My work. Not similar work. Not the same direction. Literally my project titles, my rollout dates, my diagrams, copied clean enough that even the weird spacing I'd always hated was still there. The dashboard architecture I'd designed, the vendor evaluation matrix I'd spent nights polishing, even my internal naming conventions, little abbreviations I thought only I used. Greg didn't say my name once. Instead, he said, "We're assigning all of these projects to a new lead so we can centralize execution. We need a single point of accountability." Then he clicked again. A face appeared in a little Zoom rectangle. New guy, early 30s, crisp haircut, smiling like he'd been waiting for the spotlight. "This is Ethan," Greg said. "He'll be stepping in as the owner of these initiatives moving forward." Ethan gave a small wave. "Excited to take this on," he said. "I've reviewed the materials. It's solid. I think I can streamline some of it." Streamline. The way he said it, like my work was a messy closet he was about to reorganize, made something in my chest tighten. I swallowed it, stayed calm, forced my voice to sound neutral. "Just to clarify," I said, "are you saying I'm being removed from all of these projects?" Greg nodded once like it was already decided and we were just going through the motions. "Yes, effective immediately." Quiet hum hit my ears, my blood moving faster than my thoughts. I looked at the attendee list again. Legal wasn't there. HR wasn't there. No one from procurement. No one from compliance. Just leadership. Meaning, they weren't here to do paperwork. They were here to take something. "Okay," I said carefully. "And what's my role after this?" Greg leaned back slightly, like he'd prepared this line. "You'll shift to support, documentation, knowledge transfer. We need continuity." Knowledge transfer. That's another phrase that sounds harmless until you hear it, while someone is actively taking your career apart. I wanted to argue, I wanted to ask why. I wanted to point out that I'd been the continuity for years, but I'd learned something the hard way in corporate life. When a decision is already made, your emotions don't change it. They just get recorded. So I said nothing. And that's when Ethan spoke again, still smiling. "Hey," he said friendly, "could you send over the admin credentials for the automation service and the vendor portal logins? I want to get access set up today." I stared at him, because those weren't team credentials. Those were credentials issued to me under my name, because the vendor required an accountable owner. There were audit trails, security policies, approval chains, and Ethan was asking for them like he was asking for a Wi-Fi password. Greg didn't correct him. Greg nodded like it was expected. "Yeah," Greg said. Let's make this transition clean. Clean. I muted myself for a second and just breathed. In my mind, I could already see the next 2 weeks. Me writing docs, me training Ethan, me handing over everything that made me valuable. Then HR scheduling a reassignment conversation. Then my job quietly vanishing. I'd seen it happen to other people. Good people. People who thought loyalty mattered. I unmuted. I'll need to check what I'm authorized to share, I said. Ethan's smile didn't move, but his eyes changed slightly, like he'd expected obedience, and got caution instead. Greg's voice went colder. Don't overcomplicate it, he said. These are company assets. We need access. Company assets. He said it like I was being unreasonable, like I was hoarding. But deep down, I wasn't thinking about access. I was thinking about something else. Something I hadn't thought about in months. A contract I'd signed when I joined. A contract most people never read because they assume it's standard. But I read mine. Not because I was paranoid. Because my dad worked in labor law for 20 years, and he drilled one rule into me. If your livelihood depends on a document, you don't sign it blind. That afternoon, after the meeting ended, I didn't vent to coworkers. I didn't write a dramatic Slack message. I didn't go home early. I walked to my car, sat in silence, and pulled my employment contract up on my phone. I scrolled past the usual fluff, confidentiality, non-solicit, arbitration, and then I found the paragraph I'd almost forgotten existed. The one I'd negotiated quietly at the offer stage because the recruiter was desperate to close me before the quarter ended. At the time, it felt like a small win. Sitting in my car that day, it felt like the only thing keeping me from being erased. I read it twice, slowly. And for the first time since that Zoom call, my hands stopped shaking. Because Greg and Ethan weren't just taking my projects. They'd just stepped on a clause that didn't care how powerful they thought they were. And they had no idea they'd triggered it. That night, I didn't sleep like a normal person. I lay in bed with my phone lighting up the ceiling, rereading that clause until the words started to blur, then reading it again, slower, like speed would make it less real. Because it wasn't a gotcha. It wasn't some loophole from the internet. It was a clean, boring paragraph written in legal English, negotiated months ago when I had leverage. And they weren't paying attention. It basically said this. If the company reassigned ownership and operational control of certain systems I built, systems specifically listed in an appendix, then one of two things had to happen. They had to keep me as the designated accountable owner, or they had to pay out a defined separation package and execute a formal transition process with legal and security sign-off. There was no third option, not support, not knowledge transfer, not just send the passwords. I knew exactly why that clause existed. When I was hired, the company had been burned by a contractor who vanished mid-project and held access hostage. Leadership promised they'd never let one person become a single point of failure again. So they hired me to fix that mess, and I made sure my contract reflected the reality. If you want my systems, you don't get to take them informally. You don't get to erase the person who built them and pretend it's teamwork. You do it correctly, or you pay. I showed up the next morning looking calm on the outside and radioactive on the inside. The office was in that holiday-adjacent mood. People had small snacks on their desks. Someone had put a miniature tree in the kitchen. Slack was full of quick wins before the break. Meanwhile, my career was being carved up like a roast. At 10:03 a.m., I got the first message from Ethan. Ethan, hey man, quickly, can you send me the vendor portal creds? Need them to push a change today. I stared at the screen. No, please. No, when you get a second. Just like I was an IT kiosk. I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, Greg called me into a conference room. He shut the door, didn't sit, and went straight to the point. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. I kept my voice even. I'm not. I'm being careful. Greg sighed like I was the drama. Ethan needs access today. We can't miss deadlines because you're uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. That word landed wrong, like my discomfort was the issue, not the fact they just publicly handed my work to someone else without process. I'm not uncomfortable, I said. I'm bound by policy, security policy, vendor policy, and contract terms. The moment I said contract, his expression tightened. You're not going to threaten us with legal language, he said, quieter now. That's not how this works. I held eye contact. I'm not threatening. I'm clarifying. He leaned forward slightly. Then clarify this. Are you going to cooperate, or are you going to obstruct? There it was. That managerial tactic where they turn compliance into a character flaw. Cooperate means hand over your leverage. Obstruct means we'll label you difficult. I took a breath. I'll cooperate with a documented transition, with legal and security included. Greg's jaw flexed. You're not in charge of process, he said. We are. And then he did something that told me everything I needed to know. He pulled out his phone, opened an email, and turned the screen toward me. It was a draft, not sent yet. Subject line, performance alignment, immediate next steps. I recognized that structure. I'd seen it used on other people. It was the polite corporate wrapper around a PIP. Greg tapped the screen lightly. I don't want to go this route, he said. But if you're refusing to do your job, we'll document it. My stomach went cold, not because I was scared of documentation, because I understood the play. They weren't just taking my projects. They were building a paper trail to justify firing me after they extracted what they needed. And suddenly, the Zoom call made sense. The missing HR, the missing legal, the support wording. They were trying to do it informally on purpose, because formal process triggers obligations. I kept my face neutral. If you send that, you're misrepresenting what I said. Greg shrugged, almost bored. Then don't give me a reason. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I just asked one question. Why wasn't legal on that call yesterday? His eyes flicked away for half a second. That half second was my answer. He stood up straighter. Because we don't need legal to reassign internal work. I nodded slowly. Okay, then loop them in now. If it's routine, it shouldn't be a problem. Greg's voice sharpened. Stop playing games. Games. I wanted to laugh. Because the only game happening was that they'd tried to move a house without letting the owner know the paperwork existed. I stood. I'm not playing. I'm protecting the company. If I hand over credentials without proper authorization, it's a policy violation. The vendor logs actions to the named owner. Greg stared at me like he was deciding whether intimidation would still work. Then he said very calmly, Fine. If you want to do this formally, we'll do it formally. And for a second I thought maybe he'd back off. Then he added, But understand this. If you slow this down, you will be held accountable for any impact. Accountable. That word again. The same one they'd used to justify removing me. I walked out of that room and went back to my desk. My hands steady now. Not because I felt safe, but because I felt clear. They weren't going to stop. They were going to squeeze me until I either gave them access or cracked. So I did the only thing you can do when someone is building a narrative around you. I started collecting facts. I opened my notebook and wrote down timestamps. 9:12 a.m., meeting invite title. 9:18 a.m., slide deck shown. My project titles. 10:03 a.m., Ethan requested credentials. 10:15 a.m., Greg threatened documentation. Alignment email. Then I did something I'd never done before at work. I forwarded the Zoom invite and my notes to my personal email. Not files, not proprietary stuff. Just proof of what was happening and when. Because I had a feeling I was going to need an exact timeline sooner than anyone realized. By late afternoon, Ethan messaged again. Ethan, need those creds today. Greg says you're on board. I stared at that line. He wasn't asking. He was stating the story they wanted to be true. And that's when it hit me, quietly like a door closing. They weren't going to transition me. They were going to replace me. and I didn't know it yet. But the next message I got wasn't from Ethan or Greg. It was from someone whose name made my pulse jump. Corporate counsel. The email subject line was so bland, it almost felt like a prank. Quick question. Systems ownership. No urgency. No drama. Just that calm corporate tone that usually means someone is trying not to leave fingerprints. It was from Maya Patel, corporate counsel. I'd only interacted with legal once in 3 years, and it was a clean contract review. Nothing personal. I opened it and read the first sentence twice. Mason, can you confirm whether you were instructed to transfer credentials or administrative access for any vendor systems under your name? My throat went dry, because that wasn't an HR question. That wasn't a manager question. That was a risk question. I didn't reply immediately. I stood up, walked to the kitchen like I needed water, and just stared at the vending machine for a full minute, trying to slow my thoughts down. Then I went back to my desk and wrote a response like I was writing to a judge, not a coworker. Short, factual, time-stamped. Yes, on December 18th at 10:03 a.m., Ethan requested vendor portal credentials. At 10:15 a.m., Greg reiterated this request in person and stated it was required for transition today. I declined to share credentials without formal authorization and security Josh legal involvement. I attached nothing. I accused no one. I just documented. Then I waited. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown internal extension. I picked up. Mason, this is Maya. Her voice was calm, professional, but there was something underneath it, like she was already in the middle of a mess and trying to keep it contained. I'm going to ask you a few direct questions, she said, and I need direct answers. Are you alone? I glanced around my desk area. People were laughing near the printer. Someone was talking about holiday flights. Yes, I said quietly. Good, she replied. First, did anyone tell you you're being terminated? No. Second, did anyone ask you to sign anything? An acknowledgement, a plan, a reassignment letter? No. Third, did they present this as a restructure? Yes, I said, but they publicly assigned ownership of my projects to a new lead. There was a pause long enough that I could hear her breathe. Okay, she said. One more. In your offer agreement, do you have any clause tied to system ownership, reassignment, or separation? My chest tightened. So she knew, or at least she suspected. Yes, I said. I negotiated a clause tied to operational control of listed systems. It outlines requirements if ownership is reassigned. Another pause, and then her tone changed slightly. Still controlled, but now sharper, like the situation had crossed a line. Mason, I'm going to be very clear, she said. Do not transfer passwords. Do not add anyone as an admin. Do not share access informally. If they need access, it will be done through security, with documented approval. My heartbeat slowed, not because I felt relieved, but because I finally understood something I'd been refusing to admit. This wasn't about dependency risk. This was about control. Greg didn't want a clean transition. He wanted to take the work, take the access, and shove me into a corner until I quit, or they could fire me without paying what the contract required. And legal had just stepped in because they saw the same thing. Thank you, I said, voice low. Mason, Maya continued, I'm going to send a formal request in writing. If you receive pressure, forward it to me. Do not engage in arguments. Keep everything factual. Understood. The call ended, and I just sat there for a moment with my hands resting on the desk. I felt something break, not in a dramatic way, more like a quiet crack in a part of me that had still believed loyalty counted. For 3 years, I'd done late nights, weekends, crisis calls. I'd fix problems that weren't mine because I cared about the work and the people. And in one meeting, Greg had reduced that to support and documentation. I opened Slack. Ethan had sent another message. Ethan, need portal access. Also, send me the deployment runbook so I can start owning the process. Owning, that word again. Like my work was a jacket he was trying on in front of a mirror. I didn't answer. Instead, I started doing something I'd always avoided because it felt paranoid. I began building an evidence package. Not secrets, not sabotage, just reality, captured cleanly before someone could rewrite it. I pulled up the original project tickets with my name as creator, the approval showing the vendor account registered to me, the governance emails stating security policy around credential, sharing the Zoom invite title and attendee list, and the exact wording of the slide deck titles. Greg had shown I didn't download proprietary files. I didn't copy code. I stayed inside the lines. Because I wasn't trying to win with revenge. I was trying to survive with facts. Around 4:40 p.m., Greg pinged me. Greg, step into my office. When I walked in, Ethan was there too, standing near the window, arms crossed, trying to look casual. Greg didn't offer a seat. We're wasting time, he said. Mason, you're going to provide access. Today. I kept my voice flat. Legal instructed me not to transfer credentials informally. The room shifted. Ethan's eyebrows lifted slightly, like he hadn't expected that name to show up. Greg's face tightened. Legal did not instruct you, he said quickly. They don't manage operations. I didn't argue. I just said the truth. I spoke with corporate counsel. They told me to route this through security and documented approval. For a second, no one spoke, and in that silence, I saw something I'd never seen in Greg before. Not anger, fear. Because fear is what shows up when someone realizes a plan has been noticed. Ethan cleared his throat. Okay, he said, still trying to sound reasonable. Then just add me as admin. We can keep your name on the account, and I'll manage it. It was clever, in a lazy way. Keep the system under my name while they took operational control. But the clause didn't say name, it said control. And suddenly I realized the real reason they were pushing so hard. They weren't trying to do this later. They were trying to do it before legal could force the company into a formal decision. Greg leaned in. Listen, he said, voice quieter. If you cooperate, you'll be taken care of. If you don't, you're going to make this worse for yourself. There it was, the soft threat wrapped in a promise, and something in me clicked into place. I looked at Greg and said calmly, I'm not making this worse. You are. You're trying to take ownership without following process, and you know it. Greg's eyes hardened. Ethan shifted his weight. Then Greg said the sentence that changed everything for me. Those projects aren't yours. They're the company's. You don't own anything here. He meant it as a warning, but what I heard was a confession, because if I owned nothing, then they had no reason to pressure me like this, unless they knew I still held something they couldn't just seize. I stood up. Then you won't have a problem doing it formally, I said. Loop in security. Loop in legal. I'll comply with documented transfer. Greg stared at me like he was trying to decide whether to explode or retreat. He chose retreat. Fine, he snapped. Go. I walked out, heart pounding but my mind clear. I didn't know what the next day would bring. But I knew one thing now with absolute certainty. They weren't just trying to remove me. They were trying to erase the trail. And the only reason legal had called was because someone else had already noticed a mismatch. A compliance mismatch. A vendor mismatch. An audit mismatch. And I didn't know it yet, but the system they were so desperate to take control of. It was about to flag an event that would force the company to look directly at what Greg had been doing behind closed doors. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I'd even poured coffee. Not Greg, not Ethan. Security operations. A calendar invite hit my inbox. INC 21-7. Vendor admin access attempt. Required attendees. Marked high priority, with my name listed as the system owner. I stared at it like it couldn't be real, because I hadn't touched the vendor portal. I hadn't added anyone. I hadn't changed permissions. I hadn't done anything except say no. I joined the call. This time there were new faces, people who don't show up unless something has crossed a line. A security lead named Darren, a compliance manager named Rita, and Maya from legal silent, camera on, taking notes. Darren didn't waste time. Last night at 8:42 p.m., he said, there were multiple attempts to initiate an admin change on the vendor account registered to Mason. The attempts came from our corporate VPN, from a device not previously associated with this system. He shared his screen. The vendor's audit log was up, row after row, stamped with times and IP ranges, password reset attempt, MFA challenge triggered, admin role assignment initiated, denied, policy gate, denied, security workflow required. Rita from compliance leaned forward slightly. This vendor handles data that touches client deliverables, she said, and any admin change requires documented authorization. Who initiated the request? Darren looked at a second window and then said it, flatly. The initiator field maps to Greg's corporate identity via SSO. My stomach didn't drop. It went cold and still, like my body had decided fear was no longer useful. Because now it wasn't a vibe. It wasn't my interpretation. It was the system saying, this person tried to take control. Maya finally spoke. Greg was informed yesterday that any transition must go through formal channels, she said, voice controlled. Mason, can you confirm you did not authorize this? Yes, I said. I did not. I also didn't share credentials or approve any access change. Darren nodded once. Good. Because we already locked down the account. He clicked to another screen. Account status, restricted. Admin actions, frozen pending investigation. Access, limited to read only for audit. And then the chaos started. Not theoretical chaos, real chaos. The kind that spreads through a company in minutes because the wrong system is suddenly unavailable. At 9:37 a.m., sales escalated in Slack. Client can't see deliverables. At 9:45, support escalated. Portal automations failing. At 10:02, finance escalated. Billing workflow paused. Revenue recognition queue is blocked. I watched it unfold like I was sitting in the back row of a courtroom. Greg had wanted clean transition. Now the business was choking on his attempt to bypass it. My phone rang. Greg. I didn't answer. It rang again. Then Ethan. Then Greg again. I let it go to voicemail because Maya's instruction was still ringing in my head. Do not engage in arguments. Keep everything factual. At 10:14, another call came in, this time from a VP I'd only seen in quarterly meetings. I picked up. Mason, she said, clipped and tight. Why is the vendor access locked? I'm being told we can't push updates, and finance is screaming. I kept my voice steady. Security and compliance locked it after an unauthorized admin attempt. It's under investigation. There was a pause. Unauthorized by who? She asked. I didn't take the bait. I'm not the investigator, I said, but the logs are with security and compliance. She exhaled sharply. Okay, stay available. When I hung up, I looked around the office. People were still working, still chatting, still walking to meetings. But you could feel it under everything, the invisible change in air pressure when a company realizes it might have a real problem. At 11:08, Darren pinged me directly. Darren, need your help. We're mapping blast radius. Can you explain what that automation controls? I answered with facts. Which workflows? Which clients? Which dependencies? What fails soft and what fails hard? And then Darren asked the question that made my throat tighten again. Did Greg have any reason to be doing this after hours? He wrote. I stared at that line, because there was only one reason. He wasn't trying to transition. He was trying to take control before oversight could stop him. I replied carefully. Me. He and Ethan requested credentials and admin access yesterday. I refused without formal authorization. Darren responded a minute later. Darren. Understood. Keep everything you have. We're escalating. At 12:30, I saw Greg storm out of his office, phone pressed to his ear, face red, jaw tight. He didn't look like a man managing a restructure. He looked like a man trying to outrun a fire. He started it himself. He spotted me and walked straight over. Mason, he hissed, low enough that it sounded like a private conversation. What did you do? I didn't move. I didn't do anything, I said. Security locked it. His eyes flashed. Don't play innocent, he snapped. You went to legal. I kept my voice even. Legal contacted me. He stared at me like he couldn't decide whether to threaten me or beg. Then his phone buzzed again and he stepped away, answering immediately. And that was the moment I felt it. Small, sharp, undeniable. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. Not because I was powerful, because I had documentation and they had behavior. At 1:05, Maya emailed me one line. Do not meet with Greg alone. If he requests anything, forward to me. At 1:22, compliance sent a formal notice to a restricted distribution list. Preservation hold in effect, systems access investigation. That phrase, preservation hold, isn't corporate theater. It means the company has decided this might become legal exposure. It means messages stop disappearing. It means logs get copied. It means someone upstairs has realized the narrative is no longer controllable. By mid-afternoon, the office turned into a whisper network. People weren't asking what happened. They were asking who triggered it. At 4:18, Darren called again. Mason, he said, I'm going to level with you. The vendor flagged this because there were repeated admin change attempts, plus a failed attempt to reroute approval notifications away from the normal distribution list. My blood ran cold again. Reroute? I asked. Yeah, Darren said. Someone tried to modify where the security approval requests go. That's why it escalated automatically to compliance. That wasn't impatience. That wasn't sloppy transition. That was intent. And it also explained something I'd been trying not to name. Greg didn't just want the work. He wanted control without oversight. Darren continued. We've suspended Greg's access to certain internal tools pending review. HR will handle the formal side. Compliance is opening a case. I sat back in my chair, staring at the wall. Everything was moving now, fast. Not because I pushed it, because Greg did. At 5:06, my calendar updated again. Executive review. Attendance required. Mason. Tomorrow morning. Attendees. CFO, compliance, legal, security, HR, and Greg. I read the list twice. Then I saw the last line under the meeting notes. Discussion. Project ownership claims versus contractual and control obligations. My hands were steady, but my mind was loud. Tomorrow wasn't going to be a conversation about support or documentation. Tomorrow was going to be about who tried to take what and what that attempt exposed. And for the first time since the all-hands, I realized something that scared me more than being fired. Greg hadn't been improvising. He'd been operating like this for a while. And if compliance was involved now, it meant they weren't only looking at last night. They were going to look at everything he touched, including the projects he'd claimed in front of everyone. I showed up early the next morning, not because I was eager, because I wanted the first quiet moment in the building before the story got rewritten again. The conference room was one of those glass ones on the executive floor, the kind where the walls are transparent on purpose. Like visibility makes everything ethical. By 9 a.m., the room filled in pieces. CFO first, measured, unreadable. HR next, polite face, careful eyes. Compliance, Rita, with a thick notebook. Security, Darren, laptop already open. Legal, Maya, calm as stone. Greg walked in last. He looked like he hadn't slept, but he still tried to carry himself like he owned the room. Shoulders back, jaw set, that executive confidence that usually makes people shrink. He didn't look at me. The CFO started without small talk. We're here to resolve 2 issues, she said. 1, unauthorized administrative activity on a vendor system. 2, internal claims of project ownership and operational control that conflict with contractual obligations. Greg finally spoke, voice smooth. This is being overblown, he said. We were transitioning work. Mason resisted. That delay created confusion and... Darren interrupted him. Not rudely, just firmly. No, Darren said. The system wasn't locked due to confusion. It was locked because our vendor flagged repeated admin change attempts by a corporate SSO from your identity at 8:42 p.m. That triggered an automated escalation to compliance. He turned his laptop slightly so the room could see. The audit log was there in black and white. Time, action, result, denied. And in the initiator field, Greg's corporate identity. Greg blinked. Once, slow. Then he did what people do when facts corner them. He tried to reframe. I was trying to keep the business moving, he said. We can't have one person holding critical access. It's a key person risk. Rita from compliance didn't even look up. You were instructed not to do informal transfers, she said. And attempting to reroute security approval notifications is not risk mitigation. That's bypass. That word landed in the room like a gavel. Bypass. Greg's face tightened. Maya slid a printed document across the table. Not dramatically, just like she'd done it 100 times. Greg, she said, this is Mason's employment agreement. Section 7.2. It's explicit. If operational control of listed systems is reassigned, the company must either retain him as accountable owner with defined controls or execute a separation process with enumerated compensation and formal transition. Greg's eyes flicked down for the first time. You could see the exact moment he recognized the clause, not because he remembered signing it, but because he realized he'd never read it. The CFO spoke again. Were you aware of this clause? Greg hesitated. That hesitation was louder than any answer. I wasn't responsible for his contract negotiations, he said. Correct, the CFO replied. But you were responsible for complying with it once you decided to reassign operational control. Greg's tone sharpened. This is ridiculous. Everyone knows those projects belong to the company. Mason doesn't own anything. I expected my stomach to twist when he said that. It didn't. Because the room didn't react the way Greg expected. No nods, no sympathetic looks, no he's right. Just quiet. And then Maya said the simplest, most satisfying sentence I'd heard in months. No one is arguing the company owns the work, she said. We're addressing your attempt to take operational control without process, and your public claim of authorship over deliverables you did not. The CFO turned to me. Mason, she said, did you build the systems in question? Yes. Do you have documentation of your work product and approvals? Yes. I didn't get emotional. I didn't tell a story. I gave evidence. Original tickets with my name as creator, security approvals, listing me as accountable owner, procurement threads, showing vendor onboarding under my identity, the all-hands slide titles matching my internal nomenclature, Slack messages from Ethan requesting credentials and access today. Rita asked one follow-up. Did you ever refuse to cooperate with a formal transition? No, I said. I refused to share credentials informally. I requested security and legal involvement. Darren nodded, confirming. Greg tried one last move. This is insubordination disguised as compliance, he said. He's weaponizing legal. HR finally spoke, voice soft, but firm enough that Greg stopped talking mid-breath. Greg, she said, we've reviewed your draft performance alignment email. The timestamp suggests it was prepared before any documented refusal. That's a problem. Greg's face went pale. Because now it wasn't just about the vendor log, it was about intent, about the plan. The CFO closed her notebook. Here's what will happen, she said, effective immediately. Greg, your administrative access remains suspended pending investigation. Ethan will have no operational control over these systems until security completes a compliant transition plan. Mason will remain the accountable owner during the transition, with security-approved delegation only. HR and legal will review contractual obligations and determine the company's required action regarding compensation or role continuity. She looked directly at Greg. And for clarity, publicly claiming ownership of work you did not produce is unacceptable. We will correct the record. The room went silent. Greg opened his mouth, then shut it. He looked around like he expected someone to rescue him. No one did. The meeting ended like a light switching off. People filed out in quiet order. Compliance first, then security, then HR. The CFO paused at the door and said something to Maya under her breath. Greg stayed seated for a moment, staring at the table like it had betrayed him. Then he stood and walked out without looking at me. No speech, no threat, no victory line. Just a man leaving a room where facts finally mattered more than his title. Later that afternoon, an email went out to leadership and project stakeholders. Ownership clarification, automation, and vendor systems. It listed me as the accountable owner. It credited my build-out. It outlined the formal transition process. Ethan didn't message me again, and the following week, Greg's name disappeared from org charts and meeting invites the way mine almost had. Quietly, officially, without applause. I didn't celebrate, not outwardly. But that night, driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt since that all-hands meeting. Peace. Because they claimed all my projects like they could take credit with a slide deck. But the contract detail they missed did something my anger never could. It forced the truth into the room. And once the truth is documented, it doesn't matter how confident someone sounds. It matters what they can prove.